In the deep heart of the wild forest where the trees stood tall like ancient guardians, and the winds whispered stories of old battles, there came a tale of fear and survival that would soon change into something no one had ever imagined. The people of nearby villages spoke in hushed voices about a creature that ruled these lands, a predator so strong that no other beast dared to challenge its reign. It was called the Apex Hunter, a name that brought cold shivers to anyone who heard it. This hunter was not just an animal, it was a shadow of the night, a terror of the valleys, and a nightmare of all who crossed its path. Yet fate had its strange ways, because on one silent evening, a young traveler named Ale walked through the forest with nothing but a pack of supplies and a heart that carried more kindness than fear. He was not a soldier, not a hunter, not even a man of great strength. He was only a wanderer who searched for meaning in a world that often seemed cruel and empty. His boots were worn, his hands were scarred from old labors, but his eyes still carried the light of hope, and it was this light that would soon find its test. The forest was darker than usual as Eli moved through the twisted branches and the damp earth. The air smelled of blood and broken leaves, and the silence was heavy, as if even the birds had fled from something terrible. Then in the dim, fading light, he saw a massive shape lying across the ground. Its breaths were heavy, its body shaking with weakness, its fur torn and wet with blood. It was the Apex Hunter itself, wounded and near death. The very creature that had once made the world tremble was now struggling for life before his eyes. Eli froze, his heart raced faster than the drums of war. He knew what this beast was. He knew it could crush him with a single swipe or tear him apart with a single bite. But the creature did not move to attack it, only lay there breathing shallowly with eyes half closed, and for the first time in history, a human stood so close to it, not as prey, not as hunter, but as witness to its pain. Every voice in Eli's mind screamed to run away, to escape before it regained strength and destroyed him, yet something inside him refused to leave. He saw not a monster before him, but a living being trapped between life and death. Its chest rose slowly, then fell, as if each breath was a war that it could barely win. Its wounds were deep claw marks from another predator and broken arrows that must have been fired by hunters still stuck in its side. Blood soaked the ground around it, making a dark pool that spread like shadows. Reaching for his feet, Eli dropped to his knees. He opened his pack with shaking hands, pulling out the few bandages, herbs, and water that he carried. He was not a healer, but he knew enough to clean a wound and stop the bleeding. His heart told him to try, even if it made no sense, so he stepped closer, every movement filled with fear and courage at the same time. The eyes of the beast opened just enough to see him, golden eyes glowing with both rage and exhaustion. They locked onto his figure, and Eli felt a cold wave of terror run through his spine. The hunter growled, a low sound like thunder in the distance. Its sharp teeth glimmered, but the sound was weak, more like a whisper of what it once had been. Eli raised his hands, showing he had no weapons, only cloth and herbs. He spoke softly, his voice trembling yet filled with honesty. He said, "I do not want to harm you. I only want to help." The words floated into the air, simple and fragile, yet somehow they reached the beast. The growl stopped. The golden eyes did not close, but they did not strike either. Slowly, Eli reached out. He cut away the broken shafts of arrows. He cleaned the wounds with water. The creature flinched, its muscles tightening as pain surged through its body, but it did not lash out. Perhaps it was too weak, perhaps it was curious, or perhaps deep within, even this apex predator understood the strange language of mercy. Eli wrapped the wounds with cloth, though his hands were clumsy, and the bleeding slowed little by little. Hours passed and the forest remained silent. Eli stayed by the beast, feeding it sips of water from his flask, speaking to it in quiet words. Though he knew it could not understand, he told it about his long journeys, about the loneliness of walking roads without companions, about how he believed that no one deserved to die in darkness, not even a creature that the world called monster. His voice cracked at times, his eyes watered as old memories rose, but he kept speaking because the silence was heavier than fear. The night grew colder, the stars stretched across the sky, and Ele sat beside the wounded hunter. Guarding it as if it were his brother, he did not sleep, he did not dare, for even now the danger was not gone at any moment. The beast might turn on him or other predators, might come smelling blood, yet he stayed because his heart would not let him abandon a life that still struggled to exist. And as the hours rolled into dawn, something shifted between them. The beast no longer looked at him with rage, but with something harder to name. Its eyes studied him, as though trying to understand why a fragile human would risk everything for a creature that had never shown mercy before. Ele could not explain it even to himself, he only knew it was the right thing to do. And though the forest still whispered with danger, and the world beyond would never believe this story, he felt that his choice had tied his fate to the beast in a way that could never be undone. The sun rose, painting the forest with golden light, and Eli saw the hunter's chest rising stronger than before, its breathing steadier. Though its body was still weak, the war for survival was not over, but for the first time in its life, the apex predator had not won through power or blood. It had survived because of the hand of a human, and this truth hung heavy in the air, like a secret waiting to change everything. The morning light slipped gently through the tall branches of the forest, and painted soft colors on the broken ground where Eli still sat beside the wounded apex hunter. He had not slept through the long night. His eyes were red and heavy, but his spirit had not broken, for he had watched the creature breathe through pain and fight to hold on to life. He felt something strange in his heart, something he could not name yet. It grew stronger each time. Hunter's golden eyes opened and looked back at him. The world knew this predator as a terror, a ruler of shadows, a beast that no blade or spear could stand against. Yet it lay alive only because a human who should have been prey had chosen not to run or kill, but to care. And this truth lingered like fire inside Eli's mind. He kept asking himself why he had not walked away, why he had not let the forest finish its cruel work. But each time he tried to answer, he only thought of the loneliness that filled his own life, and how even a monster deserved more than to die in silence. Eli rose to his feet and searched the forest for food. The beast needed strength if it was to heal. He gathered berries, roots, and small strips of dried meat from his pack. When he returned, the hunter lifted its head slowly, its movements sharp with suspicion, its golden eyes fixed on his every step. Eli spoke softly, telling the creature that he meant no harm. His words flowed like the breeze, though he knew the beast could not understand yet. Something in the way the hunter blinked, and the way it stayed still, made Ele believed that it was listening. He placed the food carefully on the ground near its mouth. The hunter sniffed, then growled low. But weak, its pride was wounded more than its body, for to take food from a human was against its nature. Eli did not move. He simply sat nearby, speaking gently about how the forest was dangerous and how survival required trust. The beast stared for a long moment before finally taking the food, its powerful jaws tearing slowly through the meat. Every sound of teeth and breath echoed through Eli's chest, for this was no ordinary animal. This was the king of the wild, and yet it was eating because of him. Though hours passed, the day stretched forward, and the bond between them grew quietly. Eli tended to the wounds again, washing away the dried blood and wrapping the torn flesh with fresh cloth. His hands trembled each time he touched the beast, for he knew how easily it could end him. Yet the hunter did not strike. Instead, it let him work, its body tense but still its eyes watching with something that looked almost like thought. As the sun began to set, Eli spoke again, this time not about the wounds but about his life. He told the creature about the villages that feared it, about how people whispered tales of its cruelty and unmatched power. He confessed how he too had once feared the idea of meeting such a beast, yet when he looked at it now weak and bleeding, he saw not only danger but also strength trapped beneath pain. He spoke of his own heart, of how he had walked alone for years, never finding a place where he belonged. He told the beast that sometimes humans were just as lost as the predators they feared. The apex hunter blinked, its golden eyes, its chest rising and falling in slow rhythm, and though no words came, Eli felt that it hurt him. He felt that something beyond the barrier of fear was forming between them, something fragile but real, but peace in the forest never lasted long. Eli sensed movement in the distance, the sound of branches breaking and leaves shifting. The hunter lifted its head and growled, low, its ears sharp to danger. Eli froze his eyes, darting to the shadows between the trees where figures were moving closer. Hunters, men armed with spears and bows, stepping with caution but hunger in their eyes. They had followed the trail of blood, and they had come to finish what they started. Eli's heart pounded. He knew they had seen him. They would not understand why he sat beside the beast. They would think he was mad, or worse, they would kill the predator before it could recover. The men approached, whispering about rewards, about how the king of beasts would finally fall. Eli stood blocking their path, his voice shaking, but loud enough to stop them. He said, do not kill it. It is wounded. It cannot fight. You now please leave. The hunters laughed, their faces filled with cruelty and disbelief. They called him a fool for standing between death and prey. They said no man could protect such a monster, and that the creature deserved nothing but a final strike. Eli clenched his fists. Fear burned inside him, yet he did not move. From his place, the beast behind him growled again. The sound was deeper, this time filled with anger, though it was too weak to rise. Its spirit was not broken. One of the hunters raised his spear, stepping closer. Eli spread his arms wide, his voice louder now. He shouted that he had cared for the beast all night, that he had seen more in its eyes than violence. He said that mercy was stronger than cruelty, and that the beast had a right to live. His words poured out heavy with emotion, and though the hunters mocked him, something in the air shifted. The golden eyes of the predator glowed brighter, its body shaking, as if the strength to rise was building from within. Hunters hesitated, but they did not lower their weapons. Eli's heart raced. He knew he could not fight them, but he could not let them end what had begun. Then, with a sudden burst, the beast dragged itself to its feet, towering above them, blood still dripping from its wounds, but its presence burning like fire. The hunters stumbled back, fear flashing in their eyes. For even half broken, the apex hunter was more terrifying than anything they had ever faced. Beast stood behind Eli, its gaze locked on the men, its growl deep and endless, a sound that promised death if they stepped closer. Eli turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting the golden fire of the creature, and in that moment he knew the bond was sealed. The beast had chosen not to kill him, but to stand with him. The hunters cursed and backed away, their courage shattered by the sight. They retreated into the trees, their voices fading into the distance. Eli dropped to his knees, exhausted. The predator lowered itself back to the ground, its breath heavy but steady, its eyes never leaving his, as if to say the fight was not only for survival, but for him. Night came once more. The stars shone above, and Eli lay beside the beast, his body aching but his heart alive. For he understood now that this bond was more than chance, it was destiny. And though the forest still whispered of dangers to come, he felt a strength in his chest that he had never known before. He had seen a monster become something more, and he knew this was only the beginning of a story that would shake the world. The forest no longer felt the same after that night, when the hunters had come and failed to kill the apex predator, and when Eli had stood between life and death to protect a creature no human had ever dared to defend before. There was a silence in the air that carried not peace but warning, the kind of silence that told of storms yet to come. The bond between Eli and the beast grew stronger with every passing day, but so did the shadows around them, because word of the wounded king of the wild had already begun to spread through places far beyond the forest. Eli walked each morning to gather food, roots, berries, wild herbs, and sometimes small fish from the stream. He gave most of it to the beast, whose body was healing, though slowly its wounds closed. But the scars remained deep and fierce. Every time Eli placed food before it, he spoke gently, telling stories of his travels, telling of the mountains he had seen and the people he had met. Even when the creature did not answer, Eli felt less alone. When he spoke, and though it never spoke back, its golden eyes often stayed fixed on him, as if listening to every word. Beast began to stand more often each day, testing its legs. Though its strength was not yet full, sometimes Eli saw it move in, the shadows stretching its powerful body, as if remembering what it was to rule the wilderness. But whenever its eyes turned toward him, Eli no longer felt fear. Instead, he felt a strange calm, as though he had earned a place of trust that no other human would ever hold. But the forest was restless. Rumors of raiders and bandits spread in whispers, carried by frightened travelers who passed near the edge of the woods. Eli listened one evening, as two men by the river spoke in low voices. They told of a royal convoy preparing to cross the valley. The convoy carried riches, guards, and most of all the princess Lyra, the heir to the throne, a figure of hope for her people, yet also a target for those who wished to see the kingdom broken. The men spoke of a plot of assassins and thieves waiting in the shadows to strike when the convoy passed through the wild roads. Eli's heart grew heavy with unease. He knew that the princess would be in grave danger if these whispers were true. Forest itself was already filled with lurking threats, and if raiders and assassins joined together, then no guard could hold them back. As he returned to the clearing where the beast rested, he spoke his thoughts aloud, saying that the world beyond the trees was stirring with darkness. The golden eyes of the predator followed him quietly, and though no words came, Eli felt the weight of its gaze like a silent answer. That night, as the stars shone cold above the forest, Eli could not sleep. He sat beside the beast, watching the fire he had built for warmth, his hands trembling from thoughts of what lay ahead. He feared for the princess. Though he had never met her, he feared for the beast still, healing yet bound by some unspoken fate to his side. Most of all, he feared that the strange, fragile bond they had built would soon be tested by blood and death. The next day, the forest gave them no rest. While Eli searched for berries, he heard the snapping of branches and the sudden rush of movement in the undergrowth. Before he could turn, a group of men stepped out from the trees, their faces hard and cruel, their weapons crude but deadly. These were not hunters. These were bandits. Drawn by greed and hunger, they looked at Eli with mocking smiles, then at the beast behind him, their eyes lit with ambition. One of them said that fortune had blessed them, for they had found not only a man alone in the forest, but also the great predator itself, wounded and weakened. Another said they would kill both and sell the beast's head for gold. Eli's heart pounded, his breath sharp in his chest. He shouted for them to leave, but the men only laughed, stepping closer, their blades glinting in the pale light of the trees. The predator behind him rose with a roar, its body still scarred, but its presence mighty. The ground seemed to shake as it bared its fangs, and its golden eyes burned like fire. The bandits faltered for a moment, fear flashing across their faces, but greed made them reckless. They rushed forward, weapons raised, and Eli found himself caught in the storm of violence. First man reached him with a blade, and Eli stumbled back, fear gripping him. Yet in that instant the predator struck, moving faster than its wounds should have allowed. Its claws swept through the air, tearing the bandit aside. With a cry of terror, the others shouted and attacked. Arrows flew, spears thrust, but the beast shielded Eli with its massive frame, every strike landing against its flesh instead of the human it had once seen as nothing but prey. Eli shouted in panic, seeing the blood flow again from its body. He tried to drag one of the fallen weapons to fight, but his hands shook and his arms felt weak. Yet when one bandit came close, he swung with all his strength, not skillful but desperate, and somehow the blow landed, driving the attacker back. His heart pounded with fear and courage. He realized that he too could fight, even if only with trembling hands. The battle raged through the clearing. Cries of pain and roars of fury filled the forest until at last the surviving bandits fled, their courage shattered by the sight of the beast that, even half broken, still destroyed them. Eli fell to the ground, his body shaking, his chest heavy with breath. Beside him, the predator stood, bleeding again but alive, its eyes locked on him, not with hunger, but with something far greater. A silent recognition that the bond between them was no longer only about survival. It was now about loyalty. Eli placed his hand on its scarred body, whispering words of thanks. Though his voice broke with exhaustion, he said that it had saved him not once but twice, and that he would never forget its strength. The predator lowered its massive head close to him, and for the first time Eli felt that the beast was no longer only protecting itself but him. That night Eli could not sleep, his mind filled with the clash of blades and the roars of battle. Yet beneath the fear, he felt a fire of determination. He had stood against death. He had fought beside a creature the world feared. He had seen mercy in its eyes and fury unleashed against those who threatened him. He knew now that their bond was not chance but destiny. But the danger was not over. The whispers of assassins and raiders seeking the princess grew louder in his thoughts, and deep inside, he feared that the next storm would be greater than anything they had faced yet. As he looked at the predator resting by the fire, its chest rising strong despite the blood, Eli felt a strange certainty that when that storm came, they would not face it apart, they would face it together, as man and beast united by something the world would never understand. The days passed slowly after the bandit attack, yet the forest seemed heavier each morning, as if the trees themselves whispered warnings that something greater was coming. Eli continued to care for the predator, whose body healed little by little, though scars would always remain each time the golden eyes opened and met his own. Eli felt the bond deepen in ways he could not explain. The beast was no longer only a creature of the wild, it was becoming something more, a guardian that had chosen to stand with him, and he felt a strange pride in that choice. But whispers of the royal convoy grew louder. He heard them from wandering merchants who passed near the edges of the forest, and from frightened travelers who dared not linger. On the road they spoke of the young Princess Lyra, who carried not only wealth and power, but also the hope of her people. She was loved by many, yet hated by those who wished to break the kingdom apart. Shadows followed her convoy, hidden assassins, planning to strike in the wild places where no guards could save her, and Eli knew with heavy certainty that the forest where he now stayed would soon become the place of her greatest trial. One evening, as the sky burned red with sunset, Eli stood with the predator watching the western path through the trees. He heard the faint clatter of wheels and hooves, then the glow of torches breaking through the dusk. The convoy was arriving, guards on horseback, carrying banners, the great carriage rolling slowly behind and around it, the sound of nervous voices and the restless shifting of armor. Eli's breath caught in his chest, for he knew this was the moment when destiny would step from whispers into truth. The convoy entered the clearing, the guards raising weapons as they saw Eli standing with the beast behind him. Their shouts filled the air, warning him to move away, calling the predator a demon, a danger, demanding that it be slain before it struck. Eli raised his arms, shouting that they were wrong, that this creature was no longer the monster they feared, but a protector, that it had saved his life and would not harm them. His words were desperate, yet honest, carrying the weight of nights filled with pain and trust. The guards hesitated, but their eyes were filled with fear. Then the carriage door opened, and from it stepped the princess herself, Lyra, her figure graceful in the fading light, her eyes bright and steady as she looked upon the scene. She was young, yet her presence was strong, her voice calm. As she told her guards to lower their weapons, she walked forward slowly, her gaze shifting from Eli to the beast. The apex hunter lowered its head slightly, its golden eyes watching her with the same intensity it had once given to Eli. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as the princess and the predator faced one another. Eli spoke quickly, telling her how he had found the beast dying, how he had healed its wounds, how it had protected him against hunters and bandits, and how he believed it had chosen to stand with him not as prey or enemy, but as guardian. His words flowed like a river, filled with urgency and truth, and for a long moment the princess said nothing. Then she nodded and smiled faintly, as if she saw something in the creature's eyes that no one else could see. But peace lasted only moments before chaos struck. Arrows flew from the dark trees around them, slicing through the air. The guards Shouted, raising shields and spears, assassins emerged. From the shadows, their faces covered, their blades dripping with poison. They had been waiting for this moment, and now they moved with deadly precision. The convoy erupted in cries of fear as the first guards fell. Eli's heart raced. He pulled the princes back, but before another arrow could strike, the predator roared so loud the forest itself seemed to shake. With terrifying speed, the beast charged into the assassins, claws ripping through their ranks, fangs crushing weapons and armor alike. The golden eyes burned with fury, not for itself, but for those it had chosen to protect. Eli stood by the princess, shielding her with his own body. Even as his knees shook with fear, he grabbed a fallen sword from the ground, swinging wildly against one attacker. Though his strike lacked skill, his courage burned bright, and it drove the man back. The battle became a storm of steel and shadow. The assassins fought like demons, striking fast and hard, but the predator was relentless, its massive frame blocking arrows, its claws tearing through any who dared step closer to Eli or the princess. Blood soaked the earth, cries echoed through the trees. The guards fought bravely, yet they were falling one by one. The enemy was too many, too well prepared. Eli shouted to the princess, urging her to stay behind him, though he knew his strength was small compared to the tide of death before them. Still, he fought. Still, he refused to let fear take him, for he remembered the nights when he had spoken to the predator about mercy and hope, and he knew that even fragile humans could stand strong when it mattered most. Through the chaos, Lyra's voice rang out, calling to her people, urging them not to falter. Her courage lit a fire in the guards who rallied around her, striking back with renewed will. But the assassins unleashed something darker. From the shadows came a monstrous creature, unlike any beast Eli had seen before, twisted and unnatural, bred only for killing. Its eyes glowed red, its fangs dripping black venom. It roared and leapt straight toward the carriage. The predator met it head on. The clash of their bodies shook the ground, claws against claws, fangs against fangs. Eli watched in terror and awe as the battle of titans unfolded. Before him, the predator fought with a rage born, not of hunger, but of loyalty, striking again and again. Though its old wounds tore open, once more the monstrous beast struck hard, biting deep into its flesh. But still it did not fall, still it stood. Between death and the princess, Eli rushed forward, swinging his sword against the assassins, who tried to reach the princess. He was clumsy, weak, yet desperate, and his heart gave him strength beyond his body. Each strike bought another moment, each cry of pain reminded him he was alive because of the predator, and now he would not let it fight alone. Night burned with screams, steel and fury, until the last assassin fell, and the monstrous beast collapsed lifeless upon the earth. The predator stood, blood streaming from new wounds, its chest heaving but its eyes still blazing with fire. It had won. It had saved them all, but at a terrible cost. Eli dropped the sword and ran to its side, his hands pressing against its wounds, his voice breaking as he begged it not to leave him, not after all they had endured together. The princess knelt beside him, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. She placed her hand on the predator's scarred body and said softly that it was no monster but a protector, that she would remember this night forever. Her words carried across the clearing as the surviving guards bowed their heads, for they too had seen the truth with their own eyes. The predator lowered its head, resting against the earth, its eyes meeting Eli's one last time before closing, and though its breath was heavy, its chest still rose and fell. The battle was over, but the story was not for what had been forged in blood and fire. This night would echo far beyond the forest. The forest lay silent after the storm of battle, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of exhaustion and broken breaths. The ground was stained with blood. The smell of steel and fire still hung in the air. Bodies of assassins lay scattered, shadows of the fight that had shaken the wilderness. Eli knelt on the damp earth, his hands pressed against the predator's wounds, his heart pounding with fear. For though the beast had stood against death and won, its strength was fading again. The princess knelt beside him, her eyes filled with both awe and sorrow, for she had seen with her own sight The truth that no tale could have convinced her of the apex predator, once feared as the nightmare of men, had become her shield. It had taken arrows, claws, and blades, and yet it had not stepped aside. It had chosen to protect her life. Eli's trembling hands worked desperately. He tore cloth from his own shirt, binding the bleeding wounds. He whispered over and over that it would not die here, not after everything they had survived together. His voice cracked with each word, but he would not stop speaking, for he feared that if his voice fell silent, the creature's spirit might fall silent too. The guards who remained alive stood around them, forming a wall of steel, their eyes still wary of the predator, yet no one lifted a blade against it now, for they had seen with their own eyes that it was no longer a monster, but a savior. Their whispers carried through the clearing, speaking of legends and destiny, and of how the world would never believe this tale unless they themselves carried it back. The predator stirred its golden eyes, opening, faintly looking at Eli as if searching for his face in the haze of pain. Eli leaned close, his voice steady though his heart was breaking. He told it that it was not alone anymore, that it had found a place among humans, not as terror but as guardian. He told it that even if the world feared it, he would never fear it again. The beast gave a low rumble deep in its chest, a sound not of anger, but of something gentler, a sound Eli had never thought it could make, and then its head lowered once more against the earth. The princess rose, her figure straight, her voice calm but firm. She spoke to her guards, telling them that this predator would no longer be hunted, but honored. She said that the creature had saved her life when men had failed, that it had proven itself more loyal than any assassin could ever be. Her words carried with the weight of her bloodline, and the guards bowed their heads, for no one could deny what they had seen. The predator had become protector. Danger was not yet gone. The night carried another sound, the distant call of horns from raiders who had followed the assassins. Eli's heart froze. He looked toward the trees, seeing flickers of movement, torches lighting the horizon. Shadows moving closer. The enemy was not finished. They were many, and they were coming fast. The princess looked at him with fear in her eyes, though her voice did not tremble. She said they could not stand against such numbers, not with so few guards left. Eli turned to the predator, his hand still pressed against its wound, and whispered that if it could rise one last time, they might yet survive. Predator growled deep within its chest, its body shaking as it forced itself upward, though every wound screamed in protest. Slowly it stood tall, towering above them once more, blood dripping from its scars, yet fire blazing in its golden eyes. Eli felt his own fear burn away, replaced by courage, for if the predator could still fight, then so could he. The raiders poured into the clearing, shouting with greed and hatred, their blades flashing, their arrows ready to strike. But the predator roared a sound so powerful that even the trees seemed to shake, the ground trembled beneath its paws, and for a moment the raiders faltered. Then the battle began. The predator leapt into their ranks, tearing through armor and flesh with fury that came not from hunger, but from duty. Its massive frame, a wall of steel and claw, protecting Eli and the princess from the tide of death. Eli fought too, his sword clumsy, yet burning with determination. Every swing of his blade struck with the force of his heart. He was no longer only a wanderer, he was a fighter, because he had something worth protecting. Guards rallied behind the princess, their courage renewed by the sight of the predator fighting for them. They struck down raiders with renewed strength. The night filled with cries, roars, and the clash of steel. Eli lost count of how many times the predator saved him, pushing him aside before a blade could strike, crushing enemies who drew too near. Yet each time it fought, it bled more. Each roar carried both fury and pain. Eli shouted to it, begging it not to fall, but the beast did not stop. It refused to stop until the last of the raiders lay broken on the ground. At last silence fell once more, the clearing littered with fallen men, the torches dying into smoke. Eli dropped his sword, his body trembling, his breath heavy. He turned to the predator, and his heart broke again, for the beast collapsed onto the earth, its strength finally drained. Eli rushed to its side, his hands shaking as he touched its scarred body, tears blurring his vision. He cried that it could not leave him, not now, not after it had given everything. The princess knelt too, her hand resting gently upon its fur, her eyes filled with respect and sorrow. She said softly that the predator was more noble than any knight, that it had proven itself worthy of honor beyond measure. The golden eyes opened one last time, looking at Eli, not with rage, not with hunger, but with something deeper, a bond that words could never describe. It was a look of trust, of loyalty, of friendship. The beast gave one final rumble deep in its chest, and then lowered its head, resting quietly, its chest still rising faint but steady. Eli pressed his forehead against its fur, whispering that it had not failed, that it had become more than legend. It had become protector. When dawn rose, the convoy prepared to move once more. The princess gave her command. She declared to all who lived that this predator would no longer be hunted, but honored. She named it the protector of the realm. She said that the story of this night would spread across kingdoms, and that no one would forget the beast who chose to stand with humans. Eli stood beside her, his body weak, but his heart stronger than ever, for he knew that his choice on that first night, when he had found the wounded creature, had changed not only his fate, but the fate of the world. As the convoy departed, Eli walked with the predator at his side. Though scarred and weary, it still moved with pride, no longer feared as a nightmare, but followed as a guardian. The whispers of the forest had changed. They no longer spoke of death, they spoke of loyalty, of courage, of a bond that defied nature itself. And so the story of the wounded apex hunter saved by a human, who became its protector when the princess arrived, ended not in fear, but in hope, a hope that would live in the hearts of men and beasts alike for generations to come. The end.